L'Assemblée générale va entendre.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mr. Martín Vizcarra Cornejo, President of the Republic of Peru. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Mr. Martín Vizcarra Cornejo, President of the Republic of Peru, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Señor Presidente.
Distinguished President of the General Assembly, distinguished Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I should like to begin by expressing my wishes to the President of this General Assembly every success and assure him of the support and the commitment of Peru to the work of the United Nations. Mr. President, I am convinced that the future will be built on the actions we take today, and that is why I call upon everyone to unite efforts to ensure peace, promote sustainable development, care for and protect the planet on the basis of dialogue, respect amongst our peoples, always bearing in mind future generations as we take our decisions. Growing social and economic inequality and high levels of corruption and impunity prevailing in a number of countries are an underlying risk for the future of democracy and good governance, as they are a source of unrest and unease among our citizens. Economic uncertainty, which has dragged on since the major global financial crisis in 2008, has not been overcome, and it has worsened as a result of trade tensions among the major players of the global economy. And that is why today, as never before, we must redouble our efforts for dialogue and constructive participation so as to find multilateral solutions to global problems. With this in mind, we must heed the lessons we have drawn from the processes and the negotiations which in 2015 led to historic landmarks such as the Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. Peru is a peace-loving and integrationist country, and we reaffirm our commitment to these agreements. Within that framework, along with Colombia, we have united our efforts with a number of member states to achieve a UN mandate aimed at holding in the first half of 2021 a special session of the General Assembly against corruption. This initiative sets the challenge of adopting a political declaration on corruption. I am convinced that we will have the support and the constructive participation of everyone. We hope that this all-out assault against corruption and impunity will become a global crusade. Mr. President, a year ago, in this same building, I said that I had taken on the honorable task of guiding the fate of Peru in the midst of a serious political and institutional crisis. At the same time, I stated how corruption had become a cancer which keeps us from capitalizing on all of the potential we have to achieve greater levels of progress and development. And I said that my government would not sit back and do nothing. For that reason, we initiated judicial and political reform, which is underway. We seek to restore the effectiveness, the prestige, and the legitimacy of our institutions. Today, I wish to share with you that a few weeks ago, we have established 4 key norms for political reform as a result of our debate, discussions, and consensus within the framework of our constitutional fora and through the legal channels governing democratic life in my country. These reforms will strengthen the Peruvian democratic system through standards regarding the registration and the financing of political parties, the exercise of domestic support for democracy, on parity and alternating lists of candidates to the Congress of the Republic. In the past 18 months of my government, we have been able to lead the country out of this crisis through an orderly transition, and we have undertaken an all-out battle against corruption, which was entrenched at all levels of the state. I lead a democratic government which scrupulously respects separation and independence of powers. All our decisions are enshrined in the political constitution and in law. The rule of law, freedom of the press, freedom of expression are not restricted in my country. We also have full autonomy and independence of the judicial power and the public ministry for the administration of justice. Today, my country is living through a process of change which will enable us to further grow and develop. These changes are underway, and they are taking place as is customary in a democratic process. Nothing more, nothing less. In order to avoid a situation of political stagnation which had existed, we have before the Congress of the Republic a draft bill on moving up the general elections in order to shorten the mandate of the executive and legislative branches by a year. I trust that we will achieve this goal for the well-being of our country. Mr. President, after decades of sustained growth, the Peruvian economy continues to remain resilient despite challenges we face in the international arena. My government has undertaken participatory and inclusive work in order to tackle the challenges of development. This has borne considerable fruit, and we see that reflected in 2 legal instruments which will be key for the development of Peru. One of them is the National Plan for Competitiveness and Productivity, and the other is the National Infrastructure Plan for Competitiveness. These instruments include measures to bolster medium and long-term growth in the country, and they are part of a transparent and consensual development agenda so that we can close key gaps and ensure economic and social development for Peru. These plans also reflect major efforts that have been carried out by the public and private sectors. We have shown the capacity of Peruvians to overcome our differences, to work for the future of our country, and to achieve greater levels of well-being. These goals seek to give the country quality infrastructure, strengthen human capital, develop capacities for innovation, establish a dynamic and competitive labor force, promote foreign trade of goods and services, and ensure environmental sustainability, to mention but a few goals. Mr. President, once again, I wish to reaffirm the conviction and commitment of Peru to democracy and to human rights. This commitment has led us to promote and support actions to restore democratic order wherever it has been shaken. Having said that, I wish to refer to the International Conference for Democracy in Venezuela, which we organized in Peru in August in our capital, Lima. The presence of 60 delegations from the 5 continents bears witness to the global concern at a crisis whose impact has crossed borders of the region. Without a doubt, a break in constitutional order and the entrenchment in the power of an illegitimate regime in Venezuela is the root of a political, institutional, and humanitarian crisis which has led to an exodus of more than 4 million people, 9,000 of whom are in Peru. Peru continues to promote and will continue to promote international initiatives and efforts to restore democracy in this sister country within the framework of a peaceful process led by the Venezuelans themselves. And we will continue to condemn these serious human rights violations. At this international conference, we recognize the urgent need to address the humanitarian situation in Venezuela effectively. In particular, we recognize the enormous resources that are required to address the Venezuelan exodus. The international community has not yet felt the full impact of this exodus, and we encourage everyone to do everything possible to reverse this situation. Mr. President, Peru aspires to achieving the SDGs by 2030. In this appropriate universal environment for the promotion of peace, development, and human rights, we have taken national efforts to achieve these goals with decisiveness and with political courage, and we have particularly involved women and youth. Peru is committed to strengthening implementation, monitoring, and assessment of national gender policies. And we also include this issue at all levels of public administration. We are a standard bearer in combating sexual violence at all levels. In this context, I wish to reiterate our commitment to the 5th SDG of Agenda 2030, which calls upon us to join our efforts to put an end to all forms of discrimination against women and girls. In particular, in line with SDG 16, we are committed to building a peaceful and inclusive country with transparent and accountable institutions based on good governance, an all-out battle against corruption, and the strengthening of the rule of law. In Peru, we know from our own experience that it is possible to change a country within a generation. The growth of the Peruvian economy over the past 20 years has enabled us to significantly reduce poverty. Today, our development policies and the financing of these policies focus as a priority on education, health, and the infrastructure Peruvians need in order to come together and to compete in the global market on an equal footing. We are also promoting greater formalization of our economy and the generation of decent work for all. In these efforts, we reiterate the importance of promoting policies of economic and trade openness and of promoting the green economy. These are essential for involving the private sector in the financing of sustainable development. Within this framework, Peru reaffirms its commitment to a multilateral trade system based on standards as reflected in the World Trade Organization, and we encourage everyone to work to strengthen and improve this organization in order to guarantee stability, predictability, and transparency in the multilateral trade system for the benefit of all. Mr. President, Peru is a country which is particularly vulnerable to climate change and to the risk of natural disasters. And that is why we have undertaken an ambitious commitment in line with the Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. We have drawn up a realistic work plan for the next 2 years based on technical evidence, and our hope is that we can improve our nationally determined contributions by 2020. We have drafted a roadmap with 91 adaptation measures and 62 mitigation measures against climate change. They include cross-cutting and intergenerational and gender approaches, which will enable Peru to achieve its NDCs by 2030. As one of the 10 mega-diverse countries in the world, Peru has witnessed the serious impact of climate change on biodiversity and on ecosystems, in particular in the Amazon. And that is why the President of Colombia and I, as the President of Peru, decided to convene on the 6th of September a summit with 6 countries from the region to address the challenges of fires impacting the Amazon. The result of that meeting was the Compact for the Amazon, through which we reaffirmed our commitment to preserve the forests of the Amazon and through sustainable development to protect full respect for the rights of the indigenous peoples who live there. We have also established an Amazon network for cooperation against natural disasters. I invite other governments and interested stakeholders with full respect for the sovereignty of the Amazon countries to support us in implementing this declaration. Similarly, at the national level, we place particular importance on the establishment of priority axes to combat deforestation. We hope to reduce deforestation by 20% by 2021 in priority areas and by 30% by 2030. We are working on a national adaptation plan which aims to improve our population's resilience, in particular the most vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. Peru supports any initiative aimed at limiting an increase in global temperatures. We therefore enthusiastically accept and shoulder the responsibility given to us through the invitation by the Secretary General of this organization to co-head the Coalition on Political and Social Challenges. Peru is also organizing the first high-level conference of the Americas on the illegal trade of wildlife in Lima on the 3rd and 4th of October. We hope to generate commitments and implement actions to combat this illicit trafficking among the countries of the Americas, and we hope to promote the involvement of key transit and destination countries. All of these actions undoubtedly reaffirm our conviction that we must create an ambitious global environment for biodiversity after 2020. Peru is participating actively in this preparatory process. Mr. President, Peru's commitment to international peace and security and to multilateralism can be seen both in our work in the Security Council as well as in our active participation in the UN peace operations, and that since 1958. Currently, we have blue helmets deployed in 6 peace operations, and we hope to increase this participation so that we can continue to offer a ray of hope and humanitarian support for thousands of people in the world, in particular the most vulnerable. And therefore, we welcome the reforms which Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been promoting to strengthen the work of the organization in the area of peace and security in order to increase the effectiveness and the added value of peace operations. Peru as a non-permanent member of the Security Council, has promoted realistic and flexible mandates for peace operations, and we reaffirm our commitment to provide contingents which are duly trained and disciplined and respectful of the recipient populations, with a progressive increase of female participation. I wish to pay tribute to the men and women who've given up their lives in the cause of peace over the past year. In particular, I wish to pay tribute to the memory of the non-commissioned officer Peruvian Edwin Augusto Chira Reyes, who died serving in the United Nations Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic. Mr. President, in the Security Council, Peru has constantly sought unity among the members in order to contribute to finding a solution to the serious conflicts currently occurring in various regions. In some cases, such as in the Middle East, they threaten to escalate and seriously jeopardize global peace. We have also prioritized initiatives aimed at limiting the serious consequences of these conflicts on the most vulnerable populations, in particular women, girls, and boys, ensuring respect for international humanitarian law, and attempting to tackle the root causes of these conflicts. We have assigned priority to including women and youth in national processes to prevent and resolve conflicts and to restore peace. As chairman of the Counterterrorism Committee, Peru has promoted a number of efforts in order to address this scourge. We have also promoted greater understanding of the nature and scope of links between international terrorism and organized crime, so that we can identify and break up those links, in particular through Security Council Resolution 2482, which was adopted unanimously during our presidency last July. Finally, on behalf of the people and government of Peru, I reiterate our firm commitment to the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, as well as our commitment to multilateralism. We see it as the way to resolve global problems such as climate change, terrorism, arms proliferation, corruption, and illicit trafficking of drugs, to mention but a few. I assure you, Mr. President, that Peru will continue to participate constructively, and it will continue to carry out efforts with other member states to achieve the goals which led to the creation of this organization. Thank you.
Au nom de l'Assemblée.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Peru for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the Head of State.